It is traditional Christian teaching based on the scriptures that we are all equal under God. However, our Christian heritage is being undermined by postmodern ideas originating in academia. On May the 25th, 2020, in Minneapolis, George Floyd, an African-American, was killed while police officers were attempting to arrest him. In order to subdue him, police officer Derek Chauvin placed his knee on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes. Floyd died of asphyxiation. At his trial, Chauvin was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 22 years in prison. Bodycam footage of the attempted arrest was later released. Floyd was accused by a shop owner of fraudulently paying using a counterfeit bill. It is also evident that Floyd was behaving erratically, making his arrest extremely difficult. Even before getting into the police car, Floyd complained that he couldn't breathe. It was later found that Floyd had the drug fentanyl in his system. It is not at all obvious from the footage that this was a racially motivated killing. If Floyd had not been accused of fraud, if he had not been influenced by fentanyl, and if he had followed police instructions, he would not have been killed. Nevertheless, the incident powered the Black Lives Matter movement, and a narrative was born that black and minority ethnic people experience structural oppression in a way that white people do not. The Welsh Government committed themselves to pushing an anti-racist agenda to eliminate the structural racism imposed by white people on minority groups. In June 2022, the Welsh Government published the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. In the ministerial foreword attributed to Jane Hutt and Mark Drakeford, it states,
"We all have a part to play in tackling racism and being actively anti-racist."
Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna from Cardiff University was appointed lead of the anti-racism drive. In his article, Making Wales an Anti-Racist Nation, a Public Value Mission in Action, he makes reference to George Floyd. He further explains,
I drew on my own research to argue that, contrary to the understanding of many, racism is not dichotomous in that the opposite of racism is not non-racism. Instead, I positioned racism as a continuum, wherein the racist individual is at one end, the non-racist is in the middle, and the anti-racist is at the other end. Significantly, this understanding suggests that the opposite of racism is anti-racism. This is because while non-racism may be positive in intention, it is passive in action.
For Professor Ogbonna and the Welsh Government, white people in Wales are no longer expected to be colourblind, but are expected to acknowledge the existence of the structural oppression of black and minority ethnic people, and are expected to act to tear down the causes of that structural oppression. Being anti-racist is to adopt a Marxist view of the world, not a Christian one. This anti-racist agenda requires pushing a particular narrative for political purposes, that is, to undermine structural oppression. The narrative that is being pushed is that the British Empire was bad and white people oppress black people. This is being pushed into schools.
These pupils are from one of Cardiff's most diverse schools.
Would you like to tell us about some of the things that you've been learning, Lafayette?
We've been learning about Black Lives Matter and how to stop racism and how to be anti-racist.
You've been learning lots of
Black history here isn't one lesson. It's part of everything they learn. But head to the Welsh valleys and there's a very different landscape. Here, ethnic diversity is low, but it's a large part of Kojo Hazel's lessons.
George Floyd, hands up if you heard that name. It's my job, really, certainly as a role model for these peoples here, to be able to teach them about what's outside the valleys, what's in the wider world, and give them a real rounded experience, so they can, when they do eventually get to leave, they've got a much more better understanding.
This is just as important to the maths teacher as it is to the music or history teacher.
Professor Charlotte Williams helped develop the new curriculum.
This is the right of every child in Wales to have their knowledge base enriched and expanded and to be prepared for the global connectedness of Wales.
In November 2020, Mark Drakeford wrote,
In July, following the killing of George Floyd in the United States and increased awareness of racial inequalities, I asked Gaynor Legall to lead an independent task and finish group to carry out an audit of Wales's historic monuments, buildings and street names, which have associations with the slave trade and the British Empire. It was supported by a small expert team in Cardiff.
The significance of the audit is that it looks at who we commemorate, who we remember. And when the statues or the memorials were built, it was a long time ago. Now we are fully aware of the appalling practice that slavery was. Now we know that Wales can't say we had nothing to do with it, it was all about England and the Empire. Wales did benefit from it. Wales benefited from the mistreatment, the abuse, the murder of millions of black people.
In the report produced by the Task and Finish Group was an entry for Henry Austin Bruce, the first Lord Aberdare and first Chancellor of the University of Wales and Chair of the Royal Niger Company. His statue stands near Cardiff University in Alexandra Gardens. An entry from Hansard from 1899 praises Bruce for his involvement in the abolition of slavery in northern Nigeria. The Chancellor, Michael Hicks Beach, reported that the Royal Niger Company
put down slave raiding and massacres over a great area. It abolished the legal status of slavery within its own jurisdiction.
Slave raiding is a practice that has been subsequently re-established in northern Nigeria. Rather than being someone to be honoured for his contribution to the abolition of slavery, Lord Aberdare has become a problematic individual with calls for his statue to be torn down.
I'm particularly looking at with colleagues at Lord Aberdare, who was one of the first Vice-Chancellors of the university, and his links to colonial and exploiting endeavours. So I think that my understanding would be a better, comprehensive understanding of the history and legacies of problematic individuals and how that might affect our current understandings of navigating university in a more diverse space.
And this is Aberdare Hall, the first residential hall for women in Wales, established in 1883. Margaret. While the debate rages on about sculptures and who we put on a pedestal, a reminder that there are women making history in every community across Wales today.
In a podcast, Professor of Moral and Pastoral Theology at Oxford University, Nigel Biggar, described how his book on colonialism, initially enthusiastically received by Bloomsbury Publishing, was ultimately rejected.
It's hard, this stuff, because you almost want to compare it to Galileo or something, but then you don't want to appear solipsistic.
No, that's a bit melodramatic.
Or conceited, I'm that level of Galileo. Yeah. But if you forget the level of the importance of his discovery, the fact that it was one man raging against a machine and that machine just completely clamped down on him, even though he was right.
Yep.
That's the parallel, right?
Yes, and I was really distressed. I mean, I was distressed partly because I had no alternative publisher for this book. I thought the book was important. And by the way, Bloomsbury's commissioning editor thought it was one of the most important books come across his desk. I mean, important publicly. Because my aim really was to educate the British public, not to address other academics, because I thought, I perceived that we were going to a period when Britain's historical record was going to be trashed. And I wanted to arm British citizens with the whole truth, not just the partisan part of the truth. So I thought it really was important. And it wasn't going to get published. And I thought, have we in Britain really come to the place where something publicly important that my publishing editor reckons important is not going to get published because, as I was told, junior staff at Bloomsbury had protested about having to deal with offensive, problematic material. And significantly, the management caved. That's what happened.
Why do you feel, from an ethics perspective, it is important to educate the British public about our own self-hate being, about empire being unique?
Right. So the story that's been told, especially in the last, I think, 5-6 years, and I think the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020 was an inflection point when the Black Lives Matter movement upsurged, crossed the Atlantic, landed here, and the narrative being put about by anti-racist groups, by the progressive left, is that Britain is systemically racist, and that our systemic racism is rooted in our colonial past, which can be epitomized in two words. First of all, slavery, and the racism that justified the enslavement of Africans. So our colonial past really can be reduced to slavery and racism, and any admiration we have for it as incarnated, for example, in statues to Cecil Rhodes, any imperial hero, anyone who had anything to do with slavery at all, they have to be repudiated. Well, I mean, if that's true, if it was true that Britain's 400 years worth of global engagement, colonially and imperially, was nothing but a litany of racism and oppression and exploitation, then that really calls into question much that we've inherited, all our institutions. And it makes Britain that we've inherited appear to be a bad thing. And it's if that view were to take hold, it's a precondition of erasing everything and trying to start from scratch again. It's a precondition of revolution. And my view is revolutions that imagine they can erase everything and start from scratch tend not to turn out well, tend to turn out, in fact, extremely atrociously.
Although Lord Aberdare is no longer honoured, a drug-taking felon is. On the 5th anniversary of George Floyd's death, Race Council Cymru wrote,
"Despite the challenges, we remain hopeful. Hope lives in our communities. It lives in the young people rewriting the narrative. It lives in the educators committed to inclusive teaching. It lives in every organization that signs the Zero Racism Wales Pledge. And it lives in you. As we remember George Floyd today, we do so not just in mourning, but in movement. We honor him and all those lost to racial injustice by continuing the work."
Former Muslim Dan Burwami explains why Marxists have found an ideal partner in Islam.
I realized that the left, which has been infiltrating and invading the West for the past 50 years, has found a new group to weaponize and to capitalize on its victimhood. And Islam is an endless reservoir of fury, of victimhood narratives. So that...
How so? Can you explain why?
So basically, Islam separates the world into the house or the abode of Islam and the abode of the infidels. So the world is already divided. The House of Islam has been defeated by the forces, by the powers of evil. The great Satan is the United States, the little Satan is Israel, but in general, all the non-Muslim world, especially the Christian world, is the Satan. And it has exploited Islam, it has destroyed Islamic countries, it has installed puppets to control our countries, destroyed our economies, exploited our wealth, destroyed us culturally, manipulated our young generation, invaded us with immorality. That is the perception that we had toward the West. So as a result of that, all our failures and shortcomings and inability to create prosperity or progress was attributed to the West. Of course, this is the old communist framing, the same Marxist framing of the West as the imperialistic power, and the post-colonial theory, the colonized people were exploited. So both ideas merged together. And that's what we are seeing on the streets of the West now. So the left don't look at Islam as an idea that is causing the violence. It looks at the violence as a response to an external intervention. And that is a problem in the left thinking in general. So it's not ideas that produce outcomes. They don't believe that. They believe it is the struggle that produces ideas. So if you have a violent ideology, it's not the result of your own making. No, it was imposed on you. You were forced to embrace this ideology as a result of the struggle.
Unless you're a Zionist.
Of course. The Zionist, I just wrote an article a couple of days ago in which I talked about how Israel broke the model. Yeah. So in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 70s, the proletariat in the West, in Marxism, the proletariat, they are the class that is going to bring the revolution. That the class is going to take down the system and bring about the utopia. What happened in the 60s and the 70s in the West is that the proletariat, they became very wealthy because of capitalism, because of the system in the West. So the proletariat failed to bring the revolution. So the Marxists, the intellectuals in academia, they had to find an alternative. And that alternative was identities. So the proletariat, the class of the poor people, the workers, they were not useful anymore. So they had to invent a different class or classes of a groups of people who are going to start the revolution. And who were those people? African Americans, of course. Instead of appreciating what the West has done to abolish slavery, which was a universal thing, they framed the West as the only side that was practicing slavery. You don't read about slavery, the Islamic slavery, for example. It's only the transatlantic European slavery. It's the white man. But in fact, the white man is the reason why slavery was abolished. The white man is the reason why the rest of the world followed in the abolishment of slavery. The white man, whether we like it or not, is responsible for the Human Rights Declaration, which was embraced by the rest of the world. So no, instead of giving the white man credit or the Western civilization credit, the Western civilization was framed as the oppressor. And not only African Americans, you have women too. Women were, instead of celebrating, equality and all the achievements that women were able to accomplish in the West, even though the rest of the world was oppressing women, was treating women as properties, and the West changed that. No, the patriarchy, it's a Western thing. So you look at different cultures where the patriarchy is a real thing, they don't pay attention to that. They completely ignore it. The West is patriarchal. The West is colonial. The West is this and that. So they use these groups and their narratives in order to maintain a perpetual revolution, or energy to bring the revolution. Muslims, they fit perfectly into this model because they are non-white, non-Christian, non-Western, were colonized, so they're the perfect target, and that's why. And Muslims liked it. I'm not saying that they don't like it or they were exploited by the left. No, both of them are using each other. However, who has the strongest claim against the West? It's the Jews. Why? Because for 2,000 years, they were persecuted, they were killed, forcibly converted. So the Jews, they should fit in that model. They should say, oh, the West is the oppressor. We are victims. We are anti-West. We are anti the colonialist powers of the world. We are anti the imperialistic powers of the world. But what happened is that the Jews said, you know what, let's forget about it. Let's build a state. Let's ally with the West. Same values, create a country, the Jewish state, that is an extension of the Western order. That is democracy, that is freedom, equality. And the Marxists, they were like, what? What's going on? You need to capitalize on your grievance. You need to capitalize on your victimhood. You're forgetting your victimhood narrative? So Israel, because it broke the model, it became the enemy of the modern left today.
Interesting.
So of course there were Jews who are Marxists, who are leftists. I'm talking about the modern radical left, which, by the way, is not radical anymore. It became the left. Because the sane people, the people who can think on the left, they surrendered in order to, survive. They surrendered to the radicals, and the radicals became the representatives of the left. So that is why Islam and the left are in this unholy alliance.
People using the Jewish state, just as they have the Jewish people throughout history, as a projection mechanism for their own failings. And the place where I realized this became very relevant to the American university and the Western universities was, what were the things the students were accusing the Jewish state of? Genocide, ethnic cleansing, white supremacy. The students accuse Israel of things that the students have been told that they themselves are guilty of.
Mm-hmm.
That
right.
they themselves...
Well, they see Israel as the vanguard of Western colonialism.
Exactly.
It's the whole story.
So this is a giant mechanism of projection, which is why I say when it comes to these protesters, particularly the students in the West, I say, tell me what you accuse the Jewish state of. I'll tell you what you were taught you're guilty of.
Mm-hmm. Right,
what
of course,
you were taught that you're guilty of.
Yeah. And no wonder that people rebel against that, because how the hell else are they going to expiate the guilt?
Absolutely. But here is a way.
Yeah.
And with the added thing that the Iranian proxies across the West, the Qatari money that has flooded through Western universities, not least American universities, the propagandists, the organized movements. It's not an accident that the same movement crops up everywhere with exactly the same slogans. That, is it generic that students at Princeton again the other week are chanting "Glory to our martyrs"? This is totally imported propaganda just placed over them, and these dolts repeat and repeat and repeat. But all of this has been done so expertly because it plays to the psychological weakness that exists in so many people in the West who have been taught their guilt, have been taught culpability with no means of getting rid of it. But here you have a means.